Hi, my name is Jessica Mao and I'm with the University of Texas at Austin. And this Taylor video is part one of a two-part series on decision making using a flowchart, as well as making decisions once you have student data. So what is database individualization? Database individualization, or DBI, is a research-based process for individualizing and intensifying interventions through the systematic use of assessment data, validated interventions, and research-based adaptation strategies. Here we have the DBI Framework from the National Center on Intensive Intervention. It is a guide for teachers to individualize instruction systematically and effectively. DBI is an ongoing and responsive approach to assessment and instruction, and as you can see, encompasses two primary components: instruction and assessment. Teachers collect primarily two types of data: progress monitoring and diagnostic assessment. These data help determine how and when students need additional support or interventions. Step one of DBI is to establish that there is a Tier 2 intervention that's validated or instructional platform in place. And you might be wondering, how do you know if an intervention is indeed validated? To determine this, start by asking yourself, does the intervention or instructional platform consist of evidence-based practices or evidence-based program? If so, you are utilizing validated approaches to your intervention and are in good place to continue with the DBI framework. Remember, when we say evidence-based practices, we are referring to a strategy or instructional approach that has rigorous research to support its efficacy and yields consistent positive results. When we say evidence-based programs, we are referring to a collection of practices or package program that has rigorous research to support the program's efficacy and yields consistent positive results. After we establish that the Tier 2 validated intervention is in place, we then move to Step 2, which is to progress monitor. Progress monitoring involves the following: establish a present level of performance, set an ambiguous long-term goal, collect frequent assessment data, and use decision rules to inform next step of support. At this stage, we are focused on using formative assessment data, which aids in determining how a student is responding to the validated intervention or instructional platform. Such formative assessment should be brief, should involve repeated measure that captures student performance over time, should be grade, age, or instructionally appropriate, and reliable and valid. So, what might be an example of progress monitoring tool or assessment in mathematics? Progress monitoring can address numerous skills and can come in many forms, such as number identification fluency, next number fluency, missing numbers, computations, or concepts and applications. And here we have an example of computation and concept applications. Once you have the progress monitoring in place, it is time to begin the decision-making process. This is an important step, and it's a time where you will decide if you're going to continue as is or if you need to make an instructional change or adaptation. So to make these decisions, we can use a decision-making flowchart. If you think about your practice as teachers, there are decisions that you make during the teaching and the learning process, but there are also decisions that are made after teaching has occurred through their use of assessment to evaluate student learning. Rather than thinking of these separately, we can think of the various decision-making that occurs instead as a cycle of decision-making. So thinking about this decision-making cycle as it relates to intervention, we might first make a decision to implement that intervention or provide support to students based on their universal screening data. Then we need to gather data relevant to that decision through progress monitoring. And next, we can analyze and interpret that data based on the decision. Our analysis might tell us that intervention is not as effective as we hope it would be, so we need to come up with some hypotheses as to why intervention was not working and make a plan for that instructional change. Then we implement the new changes to the intervention while continuing to collect progress monitoring data. And finally, we evaluate the progress monitoring data based on that decision. And then we repeat the cycle again. Once we have carefully examined our data and worked through the cycle of decision making, we can make the decision to either continue the Tier 2 program with progress monitoring data or collect diagnostic data. Diagnostic data is helpful because diagnostic assessments provide in-depth insight into specific skill areas and may be used to develop a hypothesis as to why the student is not responding adequately to the validated intervention or instructional platform. And then the fourth step in this process is to make instructional adaptations, if applicable, based on the hypothesis we made during decision making. And finally, the cycle continues as you continue to monitor progress to determine if the student is responding adequately. Thank you for watching this Stay Tailored. Make sure to check out part 2 of this series on decision making using graph data.